Understand Microsoft Entra ID. This module explains Microsoft Entra ID. You will compare Microsoft Entra ID to Active Directory DS. Learn about Microsoft Entra ID P1 and P2 and explore Microsoft Entra domain services for managing domain joined devices and apps. Introduction. Microsoft Entra ID is a cloud-based identity and access management service provided by Microsoft. Microsoft Entra ID is a comprehensive solution for managing identities, enforcing access policies, and securing your applications and data in the cloud and on-premises. Students should be familiar with Active Directory domain services, or traditionally called just Active Directory. Active Directory domain services is a directory service that provides the methods for storing directory data such as user accounts and passwords and makes this data available to network users, administrators, and other devices and services. It runs as a service on Windows Server, referred to as the domain controller. Microsoft Entra ID is a part of the platform as a service, offering and operates as a Microsoft managed directory service in the cloud. With Microsoft Entra ID, you also have access to a set of features that aren't natively available in Active Directory domain services, such as support for multi-factor authentication, identity protection, and self-service password reset. You can use Microsoft Entra ID to provide more secure access to cloud-based resources for organizations and individuals by configuring access to applications, configuring single sign-on to cloud-based SaaS applications, managing users and groups, provisioning users, enabling federation between organizations, providing an identity management solution, identify irregular sign-in activity, configuring multi-factor authentication, extending existing on-premises Active Directory implementations to Microsoft Entra ID, configuring application proxy for cloud and local applications, configuring conditional access for users and devices. Simple connection, self-service, single sign-on. On-premises, Microsoft Azure Active Directory and Cloud. Microsoft Entra constitutes a separate Azure service. Its most elementary form, which any new Azure subscription includes automatically, doesn't incur any extra cost, and is referred to as the free tier. If you subscribe to any Microsoft Online Business services, you automatically get Microsoft Entra ID with access to all free features. Some of the more advanced identity management features require paid version of Microsoft Entra ID, offered in the form of basic and premium tiers. Some of these features are also automatically included in Microsoft Entra instances generated as part of Microsoft 365 subscription. By default, when you create a new Azure subscription by using a Microsoft account, the subscription automatically includes a new Microsoft Entra tenant named Default Directory. Microsoft Entra tenants, unlike ADDS, Microsoft Entra ID is multi-tenant by design and is implemented specifically to ensure isolation between its individual directory instances. It's the world's largest multi-tenant directory, hosting over 1 million directory services instances with billions of authentication requests per week. The term tenant in this context typically represents a company or organization that signed up for a subscription to a Microsoft cloud-based service such as Microsoft 365, Intune, or Azure, each of which uses Microsoft Entra ID. However, from a technical standpoint, the term tenant represents an individual Microsoft Entra instance. Within an Azure subscription, you can create multiple Microsoft Entra tenants. Having multiple Microsoft Entra tenants might be convenient if you want to test Microsoft Entra functionality in one tenant without affecting the others. At any given time, an Azure subscription must be associated with one and only one Microsoft Entra tenant. This association allows you to grant permissions to resources in the Azure subscription via role-based access control to users, groups, and applications that exist in that particular Microsoft Entra tenant. You can associate the same Microsoft Entra tenant with multiple Azure subscriptions. This allows you to use the same users, groups, and applications to manage resources across multiple Azure subscriptions. Each Microsoft Entra tenant is assigned the default domain name system. Domain name consisting of a unique prefix. The prefix derived from the name of the Microsoft account you use to create an Azure subscription or provided explicitly when creating a Microsoft Entra tenant is followed by the on Microsoft.com suffix. Adding at least one custom domain name to the same Microsoft Entra tenant is possible and common. This name utilizes the DNS domain namespace that the corresponding company or organization owns. The Microsoft Entra tenant serves as the security boundary and a container for Microsoft Entra objects, such as users, groups, and applications. A single Microsoft Entra tenant can support multiple Azure subscriptions. Microsoft Entra schema. The Microsoft Entra scheme contains fewer object types than that of Active Directory domain services. Most notably, it doesn't include a definition of the computer class, although it does include the device class. The process of joining devices to Microsoft Entra differ considerably from the process of joining computers to ADDS. The Microsoft Entra schema is also easily extensible, and its extensions are fully reversible. The lack of support for the traditional computer domain membership means that you can't use Microsoft Entra ID to manage computers or user settings by using traditional management techniques such as group policy objects. Instead, Microsoft Entra ID and its services define a concept of modern management. Microsoft Entra ID's primary strength lies in providing directory services, storing and publishing user, device, and application data, and handling the authentication and authorization of the users, devices, and applications. The effectiveness and efficiency of these features are apparent based on existing deployments of cloud services such as Microsoft 365, which rely on Microsoft Entra ID as their identity provider and support millions of users. Microsoft Entra ID doesn't include the organizational unit OU class, which means that you can't arrange its objects into a hierarchy of custom containers, which is frequently used in on-premises ADDS deployments. However, this isn't a significant shortcoming because OU in ADDS are used primarily for group policy scoping and delegation, You can accomplish equivalent arrangements by organizing objects based on their group's membership. Objects of the application and service principal classes represent applications in Microsoft Entra ID. An object in the application class contains an application definition, and an object in the service principal class constitutes its instance in the current Microsoft Entra tenant. Separating these two sets of characteristics allows you to define an application in one tenant and use it across multiple tenants by creating a service principal object for this application in each tenant. Microsoft Entra ID creates a service principal object when you register the corresponding application in that Microsoft Entra tenant. You could view Microsoft Entra ID simply as the cloud-based counterpart of ADDS. However, while Microsoft Entra ID and ADDS share common characteristics, there are several significant differences between them. Characteristics of ADDS. ADDS is the traditional deployment of Windows Server-based Active Directory on a physical or virtual server, although ADDS is commonly considered being primarily a directory service. It's only one component of the Windows Active Directory suite of technologies, which also includes Active Directory Certificate Services, Active Directory Lightweight Directory Services, Active Directory Federation Services, and Active Directory Rights Management Services. When comparing ADDS with Microsoft Entra ID, it's important to note the following characteristics of ADDS. ADDS is a true directory service with a hierarchical X.500 base structure. ADDS uses domain name system for locating resources such as domain controllers. You can query and manage ADDS by using lightweight directory access protocol calls. ADDS primarily uses the Kerberos protocol for authentication. ADDS uses organizational units and group policy objects for management. ADDS includes computer objects representing computers that join an Active Directory domain. ADDS uses trusts between domains for delegated management. You can deploy ADDS on an Azure virtual machine to enable scalability and availability for an on-premises ADDS. However, deploying ADDS on an Azure virtual machine doesn't make any use of Microsoft Entra ID. Deploying ADDS on Azure virtual machine requires one or more extra Azure data disks because you shouldn't use Drive C for ADDS storage. These disks are needed to store the ADDS database, logs, and the sysvol folder. The host cache preference setting for these disks must be set to none. Characteristics of Microsoft Entra ID. Microsoft Entra ID is primarily an identity solution and is designed for internet-based applications by using HTTP port 80 and HTTPS port 443 communications. Microsoft Entra ID is a multi-tenant directory service. Microsoft Entra users and groups are created in a flat structure, and there are no organizational units or group policy objects. You can query Microsoft Entra ID by using lightweight directory access protocol. Instead, Microsoft Entra ID uses the REST API over HTTP and HTTPS. Microsoft Entra ID doesn't use Kerberos authentication. Instead, It uses HTTP and HTTPS protocols such as some WS Federation and OpenID Connect for authentication and uses OAuth for authorization. Microsoft Entra ID includes federation services, and many third-party services such as Facebook are federated with and trust Microsoft Entra ID. When you deploy cloud services such as Microsoft 365 or Intune, you also need to have directory services in the cloud to provide authentication and authorization for these services. Because of this, each cloud service that needs authentication will create its own Microsoft Entra tenant. When a single organization uses more than one cloud service, it's much more convenient for these cloud services to use a single cloud directory instead of having separate directories for each service. It's now possible to have one identity service that covers all Microsoft cloud-based services, such as Microsoft 365, Azure Microsoft Dynamics 365, and Intune. Microsoft Entra ID provides developers with centralized authentication and authorization for applications in Azure by using other identity providers or on-premises ADDS. Microsoft Entra ID can provide users with a single sign-on experience when using applications such as Facebook, Google Service, Yahoo, or Microsoft Cloud Services. The process of implementing Microsoft Entra ID support for custom applications is rather complex and beyond the scope of this course. You can enable Microsoft Entra authentication for the web apps feature of Azure App Service directly from the Authentication Authorization blade in the Azure portal. The Microsoft Entra ID P1 or P2 tier provides extra functionality as compared to the free and Office 365 editions. However, premium versions require additional cost per user provisioning. Microsoft Entra ID P1, P2 comes in two versions. You can procure it as an extra license or as a part of the Microsoft Enterprise Mobility Security, which also includes the license for Azure Information Protection and Intune. Microsoft provides a free trial period that can be used to experience the full functionality of the Microsoft Entra ID P2 edition. Microsoft Entra ID P1 edition. Self-service group management. It simplifies the administration of groups, where users are given the rights to create and manage the groups. End users can create requests to join other groups, and group owners can approve requests and maintain their group's memberships. Advanced security reports and alerts. You can monitor and protect access to your cloud application by viewing detailed logs that show advanced anomalies and inconsistent access pattern reports. Advanced reports are machine learning based and can help you gain new insights to improve access security and respond to potential threats. Multi-factor authentication. Full multi-factor authentication (MFA) works with on-premises applications using virtual private network (VPN), Radius, and others. Azure Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, and third-party Microsoft Entra Gallery applications. It doesn't work with non-browser off-the-shelf apps. Microsoft Identity Manager (MIM). Microsoft Identity Manager MIM licensing integrates with Microsoft Entra ID P1 or P2 to provide hybrid identity solutions. Microsoft Identity Manager can bridge multiple on-premises authentication stores such as ADDS, lightweight LDAP protocol, lightweight domain access protocol, Oracle, and other applications with Microsoft Entra ID. This provides consistent experiences to on-premises line of business applications and SaaS solutions. Enterprise SLA of 99.9. You are guaranteed at least 99.9 availability of the Microsoft Entra ID P1 or P2. The same SLA applies to Microsoft Entra Basic. Password reset with write-back. Self-service password reset. Cloud app discovery feature on Microsoft Entra ID. Conditional access based on device group or location. This lets you configure conditional access for critical resources based on several criteria. Microsoft Entra Connect Health. You can use this tool to gain operational insights into Microsoft Entra ID. It works with alerts, performance counters, usage patterns, and configurations, and presents the collected information in the Microsoft Entra Connect Health portal. In addition to these features, the Microsoft Entra ID P2 license provides extra functionalities. Microsoft Entra ID Protection. This feature provides enhanced functionalities for monitoring and protecting user accounts. You can define user risk policies and sign-in policies. You can review users' behavior and flag users for risk. Microsoft Entra Privilege Identity Management. This functionality lets you configure additional security levels and levels for privileged users such as administrators. With Privilege Identity Management, you define permanent and temporary administrators. You also define a policy workflow that activates whenever someone wants to use administrative privileges to perform some tasks. Line of business applications are deployed on computers and devices that are domain members. These organizations use ADDS-based credentials for authentication and group policy manages them. When you consider moving these applications to run in Azure, one key issue is how to provide authentication services to these apps. To satisfy this need, you can choose to implement site-to-site virtual private network between your local infrastructure and the Azure infrastructure as a service, or you can deploy replica domain controllers from your local ADDS as virtual machines. In Azure, these approaches can entail additional costs and administrative effort. Additionally, the difference between these two approaches is that with the first options, authentication traffic will cross the VPN, while in the second option, replication traffic will cross the VPN and authentication traffic stays in the cloud. Microsoft provides Microsoft Entra Domain Services as an alternative to these approaches. This service, which runs as part of the Microsoft Entra ID P1, P2, provides domain services such as group policy management, domain joining, and Kerberos authentication to your Microsoft Entra tenant. These services are fully compatible with locally deployed ADDS, so you can use them without deploying and managing additional domain controllers in the cloud. Azure ID Domain Service. Because Microsoft Entra ID can integrate your local ADDS when you implement Microsoft Entra Connect, users can utilize organizational credentials in both on-premises ADDS and Microsoft Entra Domain Service. Even if you don't have ADDS deployed locally, you can choose to use Microsoft Entra Domain Services as a cloud-only service. This enables you to have similar functionality of locally deployed ADDS without having to deploy single domain controller on premises or in the cloud. For example, an organization can choose to create Microsoft Entra tenant and enable Microsoft Entra domain services and then deploy a virtual network between its on-premises resources and the Microsoft Entra tenant. You can enable Microsoft Entra domain services for this virtual network so that all premises users and services can get domain services from Microsoft Entra ID. Microsoft Entra domain services provide several benefits for organizations. Administrators don't need to manage, update, or monitor domain controllers. Administrators don't need to deploy and manage Active Directory replication. There is no need to have domain admins or enterprise admins groups for domains that Microsoft Entra ID manages. If you choose to implement Microsoft Entra domain services, you need to be aware of the service's current limitation. Only the base computer Active Directory object is supported. It's not possible to extend the schema for the Microsoft Entra domain services domain. The organizational unit structure is flat and nested. Organization units aren't currently supported. There is a built-in group policy object as it exists for computer and users accounts. It's not possible to target organization units with built-in group policy objects. Additionally, you can't use Windows management instrumentation filters on security group filtering. By using Microsoft Entra domain services, you can freely migrate applications that use LDAP, NTLM, or Kerberos protocols from your on-premises infrastructure to the cloud. You can also use applications such as Microsoft SQL Server or Microsoft SharePoint Server on virtual machines or deploy them in the Azure infrastructure as a service without needing domain controllers in the cloud or a VPN to local infrastructure. You can enable Microsoft Entra domain services by using the Azure portal. This service charges per hour based on the size of your directory. Which feature provided by Microsoft Entra ID enhances security by managing privileges for administrators. What Microsoft Entra privileged identity management? What is the key difference in the management structure between Microsoft Entra ID and ADDS? Microsoft Entra ID uses a flat structure without organizational units. In deploying a cloud service like Microsoft 365, why is it beneficial for organizations to use a single Microsoft Entra ID tenant for multiple cloud services? Centralized authentication and authorization. Which service in Microsoft Entra ID P1, P2 plans helps in bridging on-premises identity stores like ADDS with Microsoft Entra? Microsoft Identity Manager. Your organization requires advanced security reports. which statement correctly identifies a similarity between Microsoft Entra ID and Active Directory domain service. Let's check. I'm not sure. How does Microsoft Entra ID handle multi-tenancy compared to ADDS? Okay. Both provide directory services for managing user and identity access. Oh, okay. 7. Oh, okay. Cool. 8. Microsoft Entra ID is inherently multi-tenant, allowing multiple directory. Okay. Looks like I chose everything correctly. An organization wants to migrate its LDAP-based applications from on-premises to the cloud using Microsoft Entra domain services. What is one benefit of using Microsoft Entra domain service for this migration? Okay, this one was wrong. Wow, it looks like everything was good, just this one. Let's see. No need to deploy domain controllers. Okay. Done for today.